B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comments. It's Tuesday, September 5th, 2017. I hope you had a great Labor Day weekend. I left the sweltering Bay Area expecting that Southern California was going to be a little cooler. But no, we were baked and broiled in triple-digit temperatures. We'll talk about the wildfires in California a little bit later. And I returned to the secret studio expecting the air conditioning to be working, but it's not. And they have a technician on the way to try to address that. It has cooled off a little bit. But if you hear background or street noise, it's because the doors and windows are open here to keep your humble host from sweating too much. Well, Donald Trump is sweating it. And I want to invoke the concept of a couple of MADmen. I'm not referring to the TV series about the ad agency cats back in the 1960s. MAD stands for Mutually Assured Destruction. It was the concept that drove the Cold War. The idea that we could reach a kind of stalemate by saying, if you toss nukes at us, we will toss nukes at you before your nukes get to us, and so you won't do it because you'll know that we will respond in a massive way that will increase the cost to the point that the opponent would stand down. The problem is that it puts millions of people at risk. And the MADmen named Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un are escalating the tensions. Now, Kim, in this case, is the trigger man. He had another underground nuclear test described as a fairly massive hydrogen bomb that was conducted underground over the weekend. It popped the Richter scale at 6 or 7. And subsequent analysis considers this to be a very significant weapon. Still remains to be seen if he can fashion a nuclear weapon like this one and put it on top of an intercontinental ballistic missile and successfully deliver that to a target. But it clearly has rattled the Trump Co. people. Over at the United Nations, Nikki Haley says that North Korea is begging for war. And we saw the generals, Mattis of the Defense Department and the Joint Chiefs of Staff chair, trot out of the White House on Sunday to read a statement. They said, we don't want to annihilate North Korea, but we have many options to do so. And they also claim that all of those options are on the table. But one of the options that has clearly been removed from the table, and it's UN envoy Nikki Haley who has confirmed this, is that we will not freeze our military exercises with South Korea in exchange for a development freeze by North Korea. And Nikki Haley, while not threatening anything explicit, said, we have kicked the can down the road long enough. There is no more road left. And what that means is they have described a cul-de-sac, a dead end, that they have created for themselves. And Trump added fuel to the fire by tweeting a criticism of South Korea, saying that the South's effort to engage the North directly is a form of appeasement. And those are fighting words. You don't call a proud leader of any nation an appeaser because their reaction could be something you don't expect and can't handle. Now, Trump has been trying to talk this situation into submission. You know, back on January 2nd, he said that North Korea would not be permitted to fire ICBMs. It will not happen. It won't happen, he said. And then, of course, in August, he threatened fire and fury on the North. And Kim Jong-un keeps calling the bluff of Donald Trump. And I believe that because he is such a proud and egotistical sumbitch, that Trump is busy playing the crazy mofo. And he thinks that by threatening everybody in the world that he can somehow leverage North Korea into ending the tests and the missile launches that have been underway. I think he's flatly wrong. He misreads the temperament of Asian leaders from China to South Korea, North Korea, Japan. And the idea that he floated that he will cut off all trade with nations who trade with North Korea, that is fundamentally China. That's not shooting yourself in the foot. That is shooting yourself right in the head. And China knows that. So at The Guardian, they run through the options. There aren't many. The opportunities to use military power are quite limited because of the risk of blowback on the population of Seoul. Millions of people there just below the border, the 38th parallel with North Korea. And when you look at the efforts to pressure China in order to get them to pressure North Korea, I really doubt that that will have the desired effect. Now, I'll be happy to praise Trump if he somehow manages to pull a rabbit out of this hat. But I want you to read the analysis that I've linked to in the show file for today's podcast. It's once again from Robert Perry, the brilliant political and historical analyst who publishes at consortiumnews.com. And he writes about how regime change wars of Bush and Obama have led to this Korea crisis. He says it's popular meme in the United States to say that Kim Jong-un is crazy. But, says Perry, he's actually working from a cold logic dictated by the U.S. government's aggressive wars and lack of integrity, and I will add that's compounded by the guy who's in the White House now. Perry says the current North Korea crisis can be viewed as a follow-on disaster to Bush's Iraq War and Obama's Libyan intervention. In both cases, the U.S. exploited its power over global information to spread lies about the targeted regimes as justification for the invasions. And we saw to the executions of Saddam Hussein and the grisly killing of Muammar Gaddafi, who was murdered by a crowd of people that first sodomized him with a knife. So the neocons who promoted the Iraq invasion and the liberal interventionists who pushed the Libya action, based on false humanitarian claims, may now share in the horrific possibility that millions of people in North Korea, South Korea, Japan, and maybe elsewhere could die from real weapons of mass destruction launched by North Korea and or by the United States. So this is a very important piece that you need to consider. I know many people who are quite frightened by these developments and the prospects of a nuclear exchange or some misguided American preemptive strike that could kill a whole lot of people. And I think Perry's analysis is really strong. He says Kim and his advisors have made clear that the surrender of North Korea's nuclear arsenal is off the table, and the world faces a predicament in which an inexperienced and intemperate President Trump confronts a crisis that his two predecessors helped to create and make worse. It's a really powerful piece, and I hope you will check it out. Over the weekend, I found time to review a piece of real journalism, and I want to commend The Nation and its editor-publisher Katrina vanden Heuvel, because first, back in August, they published a report by Patrick Lawrence entitled "A New Report Raises Big Questions About Last Year's DNC Hack." And I have touted that article for your consideration. I hope by now that you have seen it. It was based on the memo that came from the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, that's Bill Binney, Ray McGovern, and many others, that was released on July 24th. And it has led to controversy, and I will agree. What vanden Heuvel wrote was that Nation editors raised questions about the editorial process that preceded the publication. The article was fact-checked to ensure that Patrick Lawrence, the Nation contributor, accurately reported the VIPS analysis and conclusions, which he did. However, said vanden Heuvel, we should have made certain that several of the article's conclusions were presented as possibilities and not as certainties. And I join that critique. I do think that Patrick Lawrence, in an effort to push back on the very powerful establishment narrative that Russia hacked the DNC, gave that information to WikiLeaks with the direct effort, the direct goal of electing Donald Trump. But I believe that it's an important theory that should be explored along with the Trump-Russia, the collusion allegations that have been made, but that lack any public proof. And the claims by the CIA still require public evidence that has not been shared some 9 months after the first implications surfaced in October from the first CIA report that was on October 6th of 2016. I also want to note that I have great respect for both sides of the VIPS group, because what has surfaced is that there was a dissent. Tom Drake, Scott Ritter, Lisa Ling, Sean Westmoreland, Philip Giraldi, and Jesslyn Radek, they separated themselves from the strong conclusions of the VIPS report, and this did not surface until Ritter wrote a piece for Truthdig and Drake contacted the editors at The Nation. And I understand the points that they make. They're essentially saying that while this is interesting information and it is new quote-unquote evidence, that the VIPS people and the Nation article by Patrick Lawrence indeed overstated the validity of it at this point. So the Nation did something really novel in this era. They said, well, let's publish both sides. So they allowed the VIPS majority to respond to the dissent from the minority members of their group, and then there was an exchange of counterpoints. And then the Nation hired an independent analyst. They didn't actually hire him. They assigned this to him, and he served in this role without compensation, as disclosed in the lengthy report that I've linked to in the show file for this podcast at thenation.com's website. Nathaniel Freitas, the founder of the Guardian Project, a technical director, and a man who clearly knows the technical issues that were raised, goes through them point by point. And I don't have time here, and the details would overwhelm you as a listener, but I encourage you to read the entire exchange and the summation by Mr. Freitas, because what he says is that while the article was overstated, the issues it raises are technically accurate. He points out two other scenarios that could have delivered the 23 megabytes per second transfer rate of the data from the DNC to an alleged external drive of some sort. He says, there has been little information shared about the location and configuration of networks, servers, and other DNC infrastructure. We also know the FBI has never examined the server or servers used by the DNC. So for me, this review, discussion, and analysis by an independent third party is a really healthy exchange. I'm not invested in any one particular theory. I just want to see some evidence, and I want to see an honest investigation. He concludes, and let me read his final paragraph. Good faith efforts to parse the available data to provide insight into the unlawful extraction of documents from the DNC in 2016 are admirable and necessary. All parties, however, must exercise much greater care in separating out statements backed by available digital metadata from thoughtful insights and educated guesses. Walking non-technical readers down any narrative path that cannot be directly supported by evidence must be avoided. At this point, given the limited available data, certainty about only a very small number of things can be achieved. But I believe he offers investigators a whole checklist of the things that they should have already taken a look at. And hopefully it's not too late. I hope the DNC server has not been scraped or Cloroxed or whatever the term is that is used. The other big story today is Trump's weaselly decision to end the deferred action for certain immigrants, the childhood arrivals, DACA. This was Obama's response to the refusal of Congress to pass immigration reform and then the subsequent refusal to pass the DREAM Act to allow some 800,000 estimated people to stay in the United States. Now, nearly 1 million people have gone through the process and coughed up all of their personal information to the government. We'll touch on that in a moment. But Donald Trump has essentially created a new class of hostages, people whose fate will be a bargaining chip for Congress, because instead of making his own decision, which he could have to simply rescind Obama's DACA order, he said, no, I'm going to end it 6 months, March 5th, 2018. And Congress has until then to enact legislation to deal with this. So he's trying to wash his hands of the issue. He's trying to shift the onus to Congress. And these individuals will become a bargaining chip as the white nationalist wing of the Republican Party and a few queasy Democrats will oppose any effort to extend or to give amnesty to those currently covered under the DACA program. Amnesty is a dirty word, you know that. We can never allow any kind of amnesty. And Jeff Sessions was the errand boy sent by Trump to deliver the news. I will not attempt his bad Southern accent, although I'm tempted. The program known as DACA that was effectuated under Obama is being rescinded. The policy was implemented unilaterally to great controversy and legal concern. Now, that's bullshit. They went judge shopping and found a friendly federal judge in the southern part of Texas who, ruled in their favor and put the DACA issue under judicial review. Sessions called that open-ended circumvention of immigration laws. He said that this executive amnesty contributed to a surge of minors at the southern border. It denied jobs to hundreds of thousands of Americans by allowing those same illegal aliens to take those jobs. I'd like him to name just one. We know that's not true. And here's the real Orwellian statement. We are people of compassion and we are people of law, but there's nothing compassionate about the failure to enforce immigration law. So current people whose DACA permits are expiring can reapply up until October 5th. But would you? I certainly wouldn't. Can you trust the Trump administration and ICE to deal fairly and honorably? And these people have all coughed up all of their personal information. A total of 936,000 people have submitted applications, and many of them who lived with their parents also ended up giving data on illegal or undocumented individuals in the form of the parents who brought their children here. So this greases the way for ICE to deport these people despite all the promises and protests and the claims of compassion that are floating around today. And the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank, it's a brainchild of the Koch brothers, well, they say that repealing DACA could cost the economy $215 billion in lost GDP and cost the federal government $60 billion in lost tax revenue over 10 years. I think those are pretty stunning numbers. And a good commentary that I've linked to. Ben Smith is the editor-in-chief at BuzzFeed. His column is headlined, "Why Does Trump Always Shoot the Hostages?" And there's some real quotable material here. Trump, cornered, weakened, and apparently unable to get his hands on the usual levers of presidential powers, has adopted pretty much the worst possible strategy for someone trying to wield the power of the most powerful job in the world. He's shooting the hostages. A little later, he says that Steve Bannon, sought to use them as a bargaining chip. He was telling associates until his firing last month that Trump could have signed off on legal status for Dreamers in exchange for an immigration bill that would have achieved the new limits on immigration proposed by the alt-right. And one more comment from Mr. Smith here. He'll inflict real pain on hundreds of thousands of people to reassure his 30-some% that he's with them. And politically speaking, he'll have given up a bargaining chip for nothing and spent away a bit more of his political capital. That's not strategy. It's a panicked move into a corner, he says. And there's another strong piece by Ryan Grimm at The Intercept where he describes this cruel gauntlet of uncertainty, but says, in the end, if Congress is unable to act, and I don't see how the Senate will approve the repeal of DACA, then Trump will be able to have told his base, see, I ordered the end of DACA, but once again Congress has failed. It's Mitch McConnell's fault. And so after the turbulence of this period, it is entirely possible that most, if not all, of the people who enjoy DACA status today may be here a year from now. Vladimir Putin made some unusual comments at a news conference in China today, and he was asked if he supported the impeachment of Donald Trump, and he ducked the question by saying Trump is not my bride, and I am not his groom. Now, I speculate that the translator may have heard the equivalent of Trump is not my bitch, but that's just me. Anyway, he went on to say that he's pissed about the U.S. closing of the Russian consulate here in San Francisco and 2 other properties in the United States. He reserves the right to go for tit for tat on that. He also says that he is going to file a lawsuit in U.S. federal court, and we'll see how efficient the much-praised American judiciary is. So that's the latest from Vlad. The latest from Public Citizen, Ralph Nader's activist group in Washington, is an exhaustive and ambitious report on Trump Incorporated. And it shows that since he announced for the presidency, Trump has created at least 49 new business entities. Many of these are offshore or partnerships with foreign entities. Just 1 week after he announced his candidacy, Trump formed more businesses than he had ever done on any previous day. They were related to projects in Indonesia. And months later, he brought Indonesian politicians out on the campaign trail with him, one of whom was later forced out of office amid corruption allegations. So if you're interested, I'll be reviewing this in more depth, and if I find more detail that I think is worthy, I'll bring it to your attention. Brace yourselves. Hillary Clinton's new book is due out in a week or so, and they have leaked a portion of one chapter that suggests to me that she wants to reopen the wounds with the Sanders wing of the electorate. And she's saying, you know, Bernie isn't really a Democrat, and that's technically true. But she says he was attempting to undermine the Democratic Party when in actual well, in my opinion, he was trying to rescue the Democratic Party from Clinton, Wall Street, and other corporate interests. My expectation is that Hillary is going to find ways to blame almost everything and everyone except herself for her loss. And in the part that was leaked, she said that I finally challenged Bernie during a debate to name a single time I changed a position or a vote because of financial contribution. He couldn't come up with anything. Nevertheless, his attacks caused lasting damage. But she is oblivious to the implications of the millions of dollars that she earned in speaking fees, many from corporate interests, and it was simply the allusion to that was enough to cause many people to say, I can't support Hillary. And in my view, Bernie went soft. He didn't close the attack. He did not seal the deal. He simply raised questions that Hillary was unable to answer. We'll talk more about this when the book actually comes out and we have more information to work with. Kudos to Salt Lake City nurse Alex Wubbles, whose video takedown by a Salt Lake City cop, a detective who is demanding inappropriately that she allow him to take a blood sample from an unconscious patient who had not properly given consent. Well, she's gotten a formal apology from the mayor and the police chief in Salt Lake City, and I'm glad that she exposed the kind of arrogance that we see from police officers all too often. As the East Coast and Florida brace for Hurricane Irma, it's still a Category 4 storm, I think, maybe upgraded to Category 5. It is trending toward Puerto Rico and heading over some of my favorite Caribbean islands, the Leeward Islands, the Virgin Islands, and I hope that people there are safe as the residents of Houston and the Gulf Coast continue to deal with the massive flooding from Hurricane Harvey. And we've got extreme weather events here in San Francisco. I referred to the triple-digit temperatures that really roasted us over the Labor Day weekend. And we have 19 wildfires currently burning across the state, including a huge one in Los Angeles County, the La Tuna fire. And I saw the smoke effects from that as I drove north yesterday. And the blaze is considered 30% contained, has already parched or burned at least 7,000 acres. And given these weather conditions, I have to say that I have never been drawn to the Burning Man Festival in the Black Rock Desert of Nevada, which has become a major annual event here on the West Coast. And tragically, a man who may have been on drugs or may have just been trying to transcend the planet, he became a burning man. And it pains me to say that. But 41-year-old Aaron Mitchell, described as an American with a home in the United States and currently living in Switzerland, brushed past security, trying to prevent people from doing just what he did, and he ran into the burning of a giant wooden effigy as it was set on fire late on Saturday night. He was airlifted out but died from his burns. And finally, today, we note the passing of Walter Becker, the co-founder, guitarist, and a songwriter for Steely Dan. I've always enjoyed his music and Donald Fagen. They brought together an incredible group of sidemen that rotated over the years. But I want to share a brief story with you. In about 1973, I went to a concert in Chicago where Steely Dan was opening for Jim Croce, the folk pop songwriter who died shortly thereafter in a plane crash. And I was backstage waiting for my assigned interview with Jim Croce. I was led into a room, a pretty big conference room, and told to sit down. At the far end of that room, I saw Fagen, Becker, and 3 female background singers, chick singers as they were called at the time, maybe still, and they were drunk. It was very clear to me. They were all pretty loaded, and they were struggling to get the harmonies right for Showbiz Kids. And they tried and failed and tried and failed, and Fagen was getting really worked up. He was screaming at Becker. He was screaming at the background singers. And then they left the room. I got a 5-minute interview with Jim Croce and went out to catch the opening act. Steely Dan took the stage, and one of the first 2 songs was Showbiz Kids. And despite their apparent intoxication, Fagen, Becker, and the background singers nailed it perfectly. And that's a memory I'll never forget. I've had a lifelong attraction to the music of Steely Dan. I am linking to one of my favorite tunes in the show file for the podcast because YouTube's rules won't allow me to play it here in the body of the podcast. It's Dr. Wu from the album Katie Lied, and I hope you'll click on it and play it and enjoy it in honor of Walter Becker. Thanks for listening to my news and comment podcast today. I remain your humble host, Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.